Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, sorry about that. Now, without further ado, we're going to get into the questions. And the first question that we have here for the panelists is, the basic. What is autism spectrum disorder?
Tash?
I was saying, how do you want us to start answering?
Yeah, you could tell us which one.
Do you want me to start?
Hello?
You go, Natasha.
Okay. Autism is a neurological disorder that affects the brain. So it looks a little bit different for everybody, but generally it will affect specific areas, which I think is another question, so I'll wait. But it is a neurological disorder, so therefore it's something that's changed in the brain. Anybody want to add?
I can add from my part. What we usually look for in terms of when we're looking for a diagnosis or looking for distinguishing features or characteristics of autism are difficulty with social communication, social interaction. And then the biggest thing we look for as well is repetitive or what we call stereotypical behavior. So we have a trio of things that we will look for to meet that criteria to say that there is a presence of autism or is enough for the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. So the repetitive behaviors might be what people talk about a lot, the flapping. I see somebody saying hello, so I just want to make sure everybody else is hearing me. Okay, yeah, so flapping hands, lining up toys, having certain rituals of doing things, certain ways of doing things. You have to perform actions in a certain way every day, getting very, very stuck to routines as well as that inflexibility around routines. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more because that goes into more of a behavioral component as well. I think maybe somebody else should answer the questions, some of the questions, because Mario is not hearing us.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Asha Falanda, so I'm jumping in. So the next question is, can you further explain the significance of the word spectrum in relating to persons who have autism? So what does really spectrum mean?
Oh, I can start on that, and then I guess you can jump in, Natasha. They say spectrum because first there was this broad term of PDD, pervasive developmental disorder. And then under that came autism, they came Asperger's, so it was PDD, NOS being not otherwise specified. What happened is that there was this just broad range of behaviors, which something just happened to that, which people weren't able to classify. And after, I think it was more recently that they grew up with the change of the DSM-5, which is a manual that distinguishes psychological disorders. With that change to the DSM-5, they group all as ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder, which would be included the Asperger's, Rett syndrome, and everything that comes under that umbrella. We call it a spectrum too because everybody presents differently. I personally don't like the term spectrum or being so focused on that term spectrum because I get a lot of parents asking me, okay, where on the spectrum is she? Where on the spectrum is my child falling? A lot of the time we can't really tell because there's, you have that idea of low functioning versus high functioning. I don't like those terms because a child can be what they term low functioning, still be very, very intelligent. It's really how those skills are being presented or how we're able to access those skills as well. Whereas for the high functioning, they would call it that more of the Asperger's, where you have those children who are, very, very intelligent, very, very verbal, but their greatest difficulty will be that social interaction or that social communication piece. They're quite what we would label as quirky. They will still have a few of those inflexible and repetitive behaviors too, those fixed interests, but not so many of the social communication, the communication general deficits. You want to add to that, Natasha?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying in terms of, I mean, the word spectrum alone, one of the symbols they use is an umbrella, right? So they kind of say, it's just a word to describe two different ends. So like Sharika was saying as well, people ask very often, low or high functioning autism. It's not a scientific word. It's not one of the things we use to describe kids. I think what's happened is it's a term that's used to help maybe people who don't have a lot of interaction with kids to understand like what they're looking at. Like Shrika just said, a typical child who is classified as high functioning has better verbal skills or motor skills, whereas a child who's low functioning, you know, doesn't have those type of skills. And it's easier, I think, to visualize if I said, oh, you have a high functioning or a low functioning, just based on that word. But there's no value to it, unfortunately. It's just it's almost like a slang that's crept in and started to be used.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. I know Sharika mentioned the signs and symptoms, but can you go more in depth in explaining exactly how is autism presented in children and the age ranges?
Okay, I can jump in there. Janelle, I didn't know if you're here with us. Because what I have is a really, really good piece of information that recently came out, because a lot of the time we tend to be we were initially tending to do our diagnosis between 3 to 5 years, which really kind of misses that window of early intervention. A lot of research has come out recently showing that we're able to see so many of the signs now by about 16 months, right? And I don't know if Janelle's still here with us, because she can share that screen. There's a really good piece, it's a handout, it's called 16 Early Signs of Autism by 16 Months. And it really goes into a lot of the signs to look at for those toddlers and for those little ones from not only 16 months, so you can look at like the 2-year-olds and see what signs to start to look at in terms of a child not responding to you when you're interacting with them. Because, you know, as parents, we want to interact with our children, and we like to do all those little peekaboo and having that little back and forth conversation with our little ones, and we want the children to respond to us. You know, we say something, the child responds and goes, ah, or laughs and giggles and you know, responds back, even though they're not speaking as yet. They're giving you back some signs that they're engaging with you. Some of those signs will be that the child's rarely sharing enjoyment with you. It's hard to get the baby to look at you, and that really persists throughout a child with autism life, because we talk about those things like limited eye contact, limited social interaction. Those are the early social interaction pieces that we're looking for from even a baby. So rarely shares their interests with you, rarely responds to their name. And I know Jessica was talking about earlier that, well, it was in her bio that she initially thought that Maya was deaf because she wasn't responding to name, wasn't responding to sounds within the environment. And that's something that we get parents saying a lot about children. You know, is he deaf? We went and checked his hearing, and they said that the hearing is fine. And, you know, sorry, I think this is it. They say that the hearing is fine, but, you know, they're still not responding to names, still not responding to the sounds or things that are happening in the environment. As soon as you start to get excited about something and start, you know, we use these little baby voices. And we go, yay! you know, children should be automatically looking towards that and looking to engage. You know, when we say yay, children start clapping hands, you know, because they think that there's a party going on. Things like little to no imitation, you starting to clap and them not clapping, you starting to say to, you know, stomp your feet and them not doing that. And we look at these things from very early because motor imitation is so important. And motor just means movement. It's so important to verbal imitation and getting them to make sounds that you're making, and then to talking and getting them to talk. And Jessica would know that we've moved through a lot of that process of that movement, and then making silly sounds to starting to try to make words. You have them, you know, using your hand as a tool. So some parents may say, you know, he takes me to everything they want, and they put my hand on things, as opposed to, you know, them making any motion or gesture to point to you, or making a vocalization to tell you they want something. They're dragging you and putting your hand on the door for you to open the door, right? Or putting your hand on the bottle for you to open the bottle. We have that sense of object focus. So being really, really focused on objects and how objects work, and trying to figure out how those objects work, as opposed to that real focus on people, all right? Sometimes you might see those repetitive behaviors, so an unusual way of moving their fingers or their body. You might find them flapping when they get excited, all right? And just remember that flapping or doing, you know, funny things with their hands too is not the only pointer of autism, because there are some children that will do that. Some people flap when they get excited. I use my hands when I talk a lot. You know, so those are some of the things that are combined with a lot of the other signs and symptoms that you start to look at as maybe a red flag. Repeating unusual movements with the objects, excessive interest in particular objects or activities. So some people may say, okay, my child is fixated on animals. That's all they will do, all they will play with, or with cars and trucks. I have some children that they're so fixated on trucks, and they can tell you everything about trucks and the types of trucks and the names of all the trucks, but they can't have a good social conversation. They don't have a back and forth conversational skill. It has to go right back to just talking about trucks and playing with trucks. So those are some of the little things that we look at and we're like, okay, that may be a red flag. You know, unusual reaction to certain sounds and sights and textures, or those children that if you have a loud noise, they're going to go hide under the table, right? Because it's too much for them. There's that overwhelming, you know, sensory overload. And speaking of sensory and overload, I know she doesn't want me to call her out, but we have an occupational therapist that specializes in sensory who's peeping in at the chat. So I may call her out a little bit if we get any sensory questions. Right, so all of these other things are on this pamphlet from Autism Navigator, and I'll let Janelle send this link for Autism Navigator as well, because it's a really good tool that they've been creating and modifying and adding more information to support parents as well. All right, so anything else you wanted to add, Natasha or Jessica?
Yeah, most of those things that you said, that's pretty much how things that made me start recognizing that, you know, maybe we needed to get Maya investigated. The eye contact, I being her primary, you know, source of contact, I used to get eye contact, but she wasn't really giving it to other people, I would say. Definitely the not responding to her name. What really indicated it to me was, I remember one Christmas Day, she was with my family and we were all together. I had eaten and I thought that my mother had fed her. My mother thought I fed her. And then by the end of the day, I realized nobody fed her. And she did not cry. She didn't react. She didn't indicate in any way that she was, you know, hungry. Like, she was just there. And it was like, but that's not like the normal reaction that a child would have to be hungry. Usually a 1-year-old would, you know, start to cry, start to fret. She was just there. And I was like, okay, well, that's concerning. Like, I would like to think that, you know, if something was wrong, we would know. like all of those things, not having like the usual reactions to things really made me think, okay, maybe this is something that we really need to pay attention to, because I could not believe that she had not eaten, and none of us realized, because she wasn't fretful, she wasn't, doing anything like that. And even with she would play by herself, but like not the interacting with us. Like she would laugh at you, like if you did the peekaboo or whatever, she would laugh, but not trying to imitate, not not trying to mimic what you were doing. And yeah, when as she got older, it wouldn't have been the trying to show you anything. I would have to ask her if this is what she wants, or I would have to figure out what she wanted. She's not going to go and point to it, that kind of thing. So a lot of those signs there are really good pointers to take note of, because that a lot of that is what I noticed with Maya when she was younger, that made me think, that it was something that needed to be taken seriously.
I want to add two things. One, what Jess just said that really stood out to me is paying attention. Like, I think a lot of parents, the list that Sharika's read, I'm sure you can think of 3 or 4 situations where every child that you've met has done 1 or 2 of these things. So pay attention, put them all together. Also, when it comes to things like imitation and like the babbling and the eye contact, you have to teach your kid these things too. They're not things that we automatically do necessarily. So if you're not making eye contact with your kid, you're not going to learn to make eye contact. I've had a couple situations where pediatricians have referred kids to me, and these kids are like 14 months and the parents come in, they're really panicked because the word autism has been used, and these kids are not clapping, or they're not babbling, or they're not what was the other one, just any imitation skill. And really what it came down to was the parents have never actually sat with their kids and clapped, or never actually required their child to look at them. So it's one of those things where you do have to pay attention. It's a mix of all of these signs, but you have to also know your kid well enough to identify when they do them, when they don't. Jess just pointed out that, Maya makes eye contact with her, but she was aware that Maya wasn't making eye contact with other people. She was aware that Maya wasn't asking for food, where a lot of parents, just like, oh, I just know she's hungry and I give it to her. So identifying these areas of concern and knowing what you're looking for is super important, but you have to pay attention to the whole picture.
Totally, sorry to cut you off. I'm totally going off topic. I know you got a list of questions, but I just want to add something in terms of asking how will differentiate from a healthy kid to autism, going to the end of diagnosis, because like Natasha was saying, that some parents will really pay attention. How will one know exactly that your child is developing well, like for a normal child?
I want to jump in on that one, because I wanted to add to what Natasha said. It's not black or white there. It's either a healthy, typically developing kid or autism. There's so many other things that I see are presenting disorders, just things like language delay. A lot of the times language delay, along with things like sensory difficulties, can mimic a lot of the signs of autism as well. Sometimes, when a child cannot communicate, when a child has difficulty communicating, and language delay may be for so many different reasons. Some we don't even know. Some children just develop a little bit later than others. But when you have a lot of those factors coming into play, like language delay, children who are not as stimulated or understimulated within the homes, all of those can present, and those can mimic some of the symptoms of autism. Some of the behaviors that you will see as well. So when you see a lot of these red flags coming out, the first step is just to speak to your pediatrician, get in contact with a speech and language therapist. Online, there's also so many different sites now that have a list of those developmental milestones. And developmental milestones are just a list of the criteria, the targets that children meet at a certain age. So, you know, a child should be walking and talking generally by the first birthday. If you're not seeing that, you start to kind of in the back of your head say, okay, this is a little bit delayed. Let me think about this. Let me speak to my pediatrician about this. If they get 17 by about 17 months and they're not, you know, they're not producing words, they're not saying probably about, you know, 10 words. They're not saying that mommy and daddy, you're not saying a few things in the environment. Even when I say words, I mean like bath or bottle, right? Or a consistent vocalization for something, you start to get concerned. If by 2 years old, and all of this will be as you type in developmental milestones, you'll find this on most sites. If they're not 2 years old and they don't have about 50 plus words, and I say plus because most 2-year-olds have about 300, 400 words now. So 50 is the, you know, absolute minimum, right? Where they can start combining words, mommy sit, mommy look. You know, that's when you realize, okay, something's not right here. You know, and a lot of parents have their intuition, as Jess said, you know, there's always that intuition that something's not right. You know, you're looking at children, you're comparing. And I mean, I tell parents don't compare, but sometimes you have to compare to see, you know, especially if this is the first child too, sometimes you don't know, right? So it's very,
Sorry, and that's something that a lot of parents face, especially here in Barbados, where we still are very much averse to accepting anything that is not normal. You have that stigma against, you know, people thinking that you're not normal. So a lot of the time, people, especially with first children, even though they have the inclination or they feel like something's not right, they're very afraid to check because they don't want to know. You know, like they'd rather live in not in the ignorance of it, or they, even if they know, they don't want other people to know. So when I first came forward with everything, people were reaching out to me and saying, oh, well, you know, I feel like this might be my son, but like his dad doesn't want me to, his dad says he's okay. Like a lot of that happens, and then we end up putting the children at a disadvantage, because the earlier you find out, the better you can help the child to get to the point where they can, you know, be fully functional. So, you know, following your intuition, because what's the worst case scenario is that you're wrong. And then, you know, like,
exactly.
And it's great. Then if you're wrong, then you go on, life goes on. But then if you're right, you can do something about it. And it's really important to follow your intuition, even if other people are telling you you're overreacting. It's not that serious. Probably just a little thing, you know, like, you know, it's your child, you're the person that spends most of your time with it. So do what you have to do, and then, you know, let the rest worry about what they worry about.
And I just want to add, grandparents and family members, leave the child, man, he can talk when he's ready. That's the biggest thing. You know, his father didn't talk till he was 5, and look, he turned out fine. You know, I hear that. That's something I hear daily. Right. And, you know, we like to catch language difficulties outside of autism and everything, any language difficulty, we like to catch early, because language difficulties, you know, translate to literacy and poor academic performance later in life. And if it's, you know, if you don't have any sort of intervention happening too. So we like to try to avoid that as early as possible.
And I think that's like an important part of what we're talking about as well, is it's not necessarily that everything is going to lead to autism. It's the fact that if you know your child, if you're paying attention and you're monitoring these things, it's way better to ask a question. Like, you're not going to, you know, fall off a ladder and not ask your doctor to check your leg and see if it's broken. You're not just going to keep walking on it and be like, meh, maybe one day it will be better. It's the same sort of thing. In some situations, like Jess had just said, you know, nothing to worry about. You speak to a speech therapist if your child's not talking, and you know all your friends' kids are talking. Like Shrika said, you're not comparing them, but you are using that as a ruler to be
a benchmark.
You know, yeah, exactly, benchmark. That's what I was looking for. To say this is, you know, where we should be, and then figuring out why. It may be something simple like, okay, you know what? I'm not sitting down and talking to them. I'm not going to start a conversation about screen time, but that is where we have a situation. But that is where we see a lot of kids who have language delays without any sort of developmental delay. It's because screens don't talk back to you, right? You're watching, and what they're doing is they're watching the colors move, they're watching the people talking back and forth, but they're not practicing talking. So, I mean, it could be nothing. It could just be the environment the kids are in. So it's one of those things where you have to step back, you have to pay attention to the whole picture. And Sharika kept saying this over and over again, but I want to emphasize, autism is a list of characteristics. It doesn't define, like Jess just said, the whole child. It is something that that child is living with. You know, it's just the way that the child learns in a particular manner or doesn't learn in a particular manner. And by identifying the deficits that they have and reaching out to the resources that you can get, it really makes a huge difference. And the early intervention, as we keep saying, is key. I mean, if you think about just the way that we learn in general, if you know you're not pushed or you're not asked to do certain things, at 7, 8, 9, 10, it's a lot harder to ask a kid to all of a sudden start talking when they didn't need to talk before that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of questions coming up in the chat, and I also see Anika Paul has a hand raised. So thank you very much for explaining that autism is a characteristic, and we need to basically understand the importance of paying attention to our children as they grow older, in order to look for signs that is maybe not as abnormal or normal in terms of their developmental milestones. The next question that we would like to ask is your experience dealing with children with autism. How has been your experience dealing with children with autism? Anyone?
Where would you like to start?
Go, Jess.
Me? Oh, well, I only have experience with one child with autism, but it's something that calls for a lot of patience. It definitely, I can say that I've grown into a very patient person. It calls for a lot of understanding. A lot of the times, as adults, because you know we know how things are supposed to be, I kind of always have to remind myself that she's not experiencing it the way that I am, if you get what I mean. Like, it's harder for her than it is for me then. So I always have to be kind of aware of the fact that if I am tired and I feel like it's a lot for me, I can't imagine what it feels like for her, because she doesn't understand what's happening. She's a person that's going through it, and you know she's having to deal with it. So it calls for a lot of understanding. It calls for a lot of patience. It calls for a lot of education for yourself as a parent, because I think it is easy to rely on, you know, having a therapist. Send her to Natasha. She did sessions with Natasha. She did sessions with Sharika. But then she has to come home with me, right? So if I don't know what Natasha and Sharika are doing with her, and I don't understand what they're trying to achieve, and when she comes home, she goes back to what, right? And then she's basically only growing and learning when she's with them for an hour, or when she's with Sharika for half hour. Like, it doesn't make sense. So as a parent, it calls for you being very involved. It calls for having a very hands-on approach. It calls for acceptance. Denial, there's no place for denial in dealing with a child with autism. It's just, you have to accept that it is what it is. And I know that's very hard to do, and it takes parents a long time to get there, but you have to get there. You gotta make yourself get there, because the quicker you're able to accept that this is what it is, and you know, face problems, you know, head on, then the easier you make it for your child. Because the longer you deny it is the longer that they go without the help that they need, and the only person that suffers in that situation is your child itself. So, but yes, definitely patience, understanding, be involved. It calls for a lot, but I mean, it's your child, so I'm hoping that you will be willing to do it, right? Like, I assume that you will be willing to do it. So that's what it is. That's my experience with the autistic child.
And I'm a super mom. I think anybody who is a parent who is not sure or a little bit hesitant in any of this, sorry, Jess, I'm putting you on the spot, but reach out to Jess. She really is a super mom. She does all of these things with us. She is Maya's biggest advocate. And she has, I mean, she's worked with us for a little while. So she knows us as well in the way that she also can help with the relationship you should have with your therapist. And I talk to Jess about this all the time. We work in a one-on-one situation with most of the kids that we work with. Whether the parent's there or not, it's still us controlling the whole environment. if I say to Jess, hey, by the way, when you go home, I need you to do this and this with Maya, and I need to do it like 6 times an hour. I need her to say to me, there's no way, Natasha, like we need a better plan. And I think a lot of parents don't tell me this. And so, when I'm asking how's it going at home, and they're saying, oh, it's the same and nothing's changed, then I can't really help, because for me, the thing that I'm thinking is going to start helping, I'm now thinking it's not working because you say you're doing it, but you're not. It's way, way more helpful for me to be able to hear that's not going to work with our environment, because like Jess just said, she's the one taking not you. She's the one taking the child home. She's the one who's going to be able to make this consistent. And if you don't have that good open relationship where you can talk to your therapist in any sort of field, our goal is to support you and the kids. We're not magic, as much as we like to believe we are. We're helping you one step of the way. So if you're not able to do these things at home, then we're giving you something that it's not going to work. And then that's, again, putting the kid right back at, Sharika said, in a position where they're not going to reach their full potential. We're just hindering them once again because we're still not helping them. So having that relationship, again, Jess is a star at everything she does with Maya. And she really, really just, even the blog that she does, she's always open for ideas. If anybody has any questions, they need some research that she can write a topic on. Jess, again, putting you on the spot.
No pressure.
This is my way to motivate Jess. But reach out to other parents. That's the other thing. Like, we don't have, I'm not going to speak for the whole island, but I'm not aware of really great parent support groups. And I think that's the hard part as well. I've worked with kids on the spectrum for 10 years, but I don't know what it's like to go home and try and cook dinner and pack bags and, do all your other daily stuff with a kid running around that you're trying to engage and you're trying to keep on a path. So I think reaching out to other parents, and whether it's the good or the bad, knowing somebody else is going through it with you, I think that's so important.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And what Natasha and Jessica have said is really highlighting the point of a lot of what I do. A lot of what I do is not just you drop off your kid for therapy and whatever happens. I do a lot of parent coaching, and I'm showing them why I'm doing what I'm doing. And Jessica will tell you, I always put her on the spot. Why are we doing this? What happened? What went well? What did she do? Did you see what she just did? How did you respond to her? And that's so important, because for me, you see me half an hour every week, right? Generally, typically, some people will see me twice a week, but generally people will see me once a week for half an hour. But it's then the parent's role to take these skills and to transfer them to home, because that's what we want. We want generalization of skills, right? We want that when this happens here in a clinic setting, where it's all cool and has all the toys and fun things, we want a parent to be able to carry it then and to be able to take it home. And this quarantine lockdown edition has really helped me to see, how important that is. And I've just really watched, like, sometimes I will just sit and watch Jess and some of my other parents, because I'm coaching and I'm just here sitting back and saying, okay, do this and try this, while they're doing the therapy now at home, while we're doing our virtual coaching, and just seeing the parents really blossom, and they're just shining as they're doing the therapy. And I'm just over here, I'm sitting back going, yeah. Jessica will tell you that. I'm literally doing that. And it's so good, because you see how the skills are really, blossoming at home, and you're able to see how that interaction is blooming. Because I don't worry about anything else. Parents ask me about things like, when's she going to talk, when's he going to be, saying things. I want that engagement piece, because once we have that engagement piece, everything else comes after. Once we can have that interaction, a child is not going to interact with you unless they feel, or talk to you, I should say, unless they feel that need to interact with you, until they need to know that they need to use some sort of communication to initiate something, until they feel like they need to say, oh, come look at this, right? Come play with me, Right. So that's, you know, some of the biggest things that I work on, that shared engagement. I think, just going back to the question, because I think we went off the initial question a little bit, for what it's like working with a child with autism. The biggest thing for me is getting that social engagement piece. I mean, it's such a rewarding job, because I come in, I see kids come in and parents come in, and I think it's also what it's like working with a parent with a child with autism. When they come, they don't have that hope. You know, a lot of the times people have told them, you know, your child's never going to talk. You know, they have this thing, and they're not able to interact with others, and they're hearing can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. And I start with, what can your child do? What can he or she do? How does he get your attention? How does he interact with you? So it's so rewarding to start to give them that hope. And when they have that hope, their interaction starts to change, right? Because it's very, very frustrating that you're talking to a child and you're trying to interact with a child and you're getting nothing back. That is something that's really, really tough emotionally for parents. So when we can start to teach that, and we start to give that hope, and to give parents those skills, then they start to see the change in their children, and then you start to get more interaction. So it builds and builds and builds on that, right? So it's rewarding.
Oh, it's the best. I wouldn't trade my job for anything.
I wouldn't.
Okay, thank you very much. We want to move on to Anita Hall. Anita Hall, who has her hand raised. Please place your question in the chat so I could repeat the question to the panelists. We're going to move on to the next question, which is from the chat. Are there any tests that can be done during pregnancy to assess the likelihood of the child having autism or similar neurological disorder?
At this stage, no.
No?
No. I'm not sure if they're pushing towards it. I know because there's no confirmed identifying marker to say, you know, this is definitely a genetic thing. There are always these speculations about where it's, you know, why it happens, and they talk about there's a genetic link. They talk about paternal age of age of the father. There's so many things, and the research is still trying, but there's nothing that you can pinpoint it to.
Okay, so I want to jump down further down in the chat because it seems like a really interesting question by Zahiro. They want to know what's the deal between vaccinations and autism.
Oh, I don't touch vaccinations at all.
I feel that.
That's
a very controversial.
Yeah,
topic.
It is, and I would think that's more geared towards a medical professional.
Yeah,
you can look it up. You can read some great research on both sides, but there's no. I mean, like Shrika said, we don't touch it at all because it is so controversial, and it's not really our scope being medical.
It's not my scope of practice.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question in the chat. So I'm not literally following the order, so I'm just winging it right now. So the question is from Trey. Would you say there's a stigma surrounding a child being diagnosed with autism? And the other part of the question, do you think that stigma could play a role in parents dismissing early signs?
I'll start with that, definitely. I think it's not even just a child with autism. In Barbados generally, which is the reason why I started the blog, there's a stigma around any kind of disorder. You know, like even mental illness on a whole, and autism is not mental illness, but I'm just using that as an example. We don't take mental illness mental illness is always something that Barbadians tend to hide up. So if you know that you have somebody in your family that's bipolar, like instead of acknowledging that they're bipolar and getting them help, like that's just crazy Uncle John, you know, like that's how Bajans react to things that are not normal. And autism is pretty much the same way. A lot of people, like I tell you, there are a lot of people that have come to me and said, I think that, you know, my daughter may be autistic, you know, but her father don't wanna, you know, or my mother told me leave her, nothing wrong with her. Like I remember getting an aggressive kind of response when I first broached the thought that Maya was, you know, autistic. Stop comparing she to other children. Nothing wrong with the child. You just want you see everybody else doing this and you think she should be doing it at this time and blah blah blah. And I was like, I don't think that I'm being unreasonable. She's my child, and they think that I know if something is not right. So, you know, but we don't want to. There's always if you get this diagnosis, then she's autistic.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's the end of her life right there. She's just always going to be autistic. And like, if you know, as if autistic is a death sentence, like she's always going to be autistic. There's nothing we can do to save her, guys. She's autistic. That's not what, like, she's autistic. It's no different to if you were told that you were diabetic. If you were diabetic, you would change your life. You would change how you eat. You know, you would, exercise, make sure you're healthy. If you had, I don't know, give me some other random disorder, anything physical.
High blood pressure.
A physical thing, like you would react normal. You'd be like, okay, well, I have this, so I need to do this. So why is it different when you hear that a child is autistic? Like why all of a sudden, why is it the end of the world? Is that the stigma is definitely there, and that's something that I'm working. I want to change, because I tell people all the time, I really, really love my child. And like from the time she was born, I was like, whatever I have to do to protect her, I will. And I'm convinced that my purpose is to make sure that as she gets older, she doesn't have to face a lot of the bullying and, like ignorance that people now have to face with autism, because I don't know how I will handle it if she does. I think I will lose my mind. I will go crazy and trying to protect her. So I'm trying to save y'all really and truly from me. Spread awareness, because I'm trying to make sure that y'all raise your children to accept my child, so I don't have to crack heads. Pretty much, that's what I'm saying. So yeah, definitely there's a stigma there, and it's something that we need to work towards. It's not just autism awareness; it's autism acceptance. It's not just being aware that this is a thing, but accepting that they're just like everybody else. They just learn things differently. They just do things a little differently, and we just need to be able to accommodate what they do. But it's not the end of the world.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add a bit to what Jess says. I love that Jessica does not accept the stigma of autism, because she treats Maya the same way as you treat a typically developing child, because Maya gives you all the attitude. She will roll her eyes, she will stomp off, she will do everything, although she's nonverbal at this stage. She will roll her eyes, she will stomp off, she will give you so much sass and attitude, and if she doesn't want to do it, she will give you all the antics and everything. And just her response to it is not like, okay, no, you have autism, that's okay. She's like, hey. She's like, yeah, no, you need to do that. We're not playing here. Jess does not play. And I think that's a really good thing, because we the stigma is real. We can't avoid it. Sometimes we stay in our our professional bubble sometimes, and we think everybody's going to be so accepting of this, and you can go into mainstream school just with an aid and it's fine. But the reality is we have to go in and we have to deal with teachers that have no idea how to work with a child with autism. I mean, sometimes it's lovely and it flows seamlessly, and teachers are interested in learning more. Sometimes it's not. Some teachers will say, I don't want this child in my class. This child is not typically developing. So no, send them to a special school, because it's all about that level of information and that level of education that they have around working with a child with autism. There's some people that come to us, they will call us and say, okay, I have this child that seems to have autism in my daycare or in my school. How do I work with this child? Which is good, because we're seeing a lot more of that, and we get to go in and sprinkle that magic dust. But other times there's some people who are still not willing to accept and to understand, and to understand that you may need to give a child a little bit more time to do this, or they might need a movement break, as my OT would say, wink wink. They might need a brain break or a movement break or something, and just putting that whole idea of adding as much support as we can for this child. We talk about transactional support. So what are the child's needs, and what do we need to put in place and to set up to support these needs? You know, if a child, somebody may call and say, okay, this child is biting, this child bit a child in class. And the teachers kind of pretty much writes off the child because they bit or they hit the child, as opposed to calling us and saying, you know, what do we do here? You know, because the first thing is, I don't want to deal with this child. This child has whatever, you know, bad behaved. That's what we're going to hear a lot. They might say they have autism. So there's a big stigma still towards what doesn't fit into the typical situation, whether it be for society, whether it be somebody in the supermarket eyeing a child that's having a huge meltdown on the floor, you know, whether it be not accepting children in mainstream. And I'm really glad that you guys have, you know, created a situation where we can talk about this and where you can get more information. And I hope that we see more of this happening, you know, so that we can support more children with autism, so that, you know, when you see a mother, you know, it's totally exasperated because the child's there having a meltdown, and you're not going to suddenly go, oh, you can't control your child. You know, he wants some good lashes. Yeah. Exactly. So we do need to get rid of this stigma.
And the stigma also isn't just even, like Sharika said, it's not even just the aggression, you know, like maybe bullying and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Even with regards to like the teachers, Maya used to go to a nursery where before I put her there, they told me, oh yes, we've dealt with children on the spectrum before. And then when they got there, their way of dealing with her was pretty much just to let her do whatever she wanted. They didn't make her interact with the other kids. She wasn't forced to do the activities that everybody else had to do. Like, and my child is really smart, so she knows who she can play with. So she knows that if she cries, as long as she cries and you give her way, she's like, oh, there's an easy target here. And then she's never going to do what you want her to do, because she's going to always have her way. And children are smart like that. They know who they can, you know, who they can pull the string. And their way of dealing with her was, you know, oh, well, she's crying, so leave her. And then it was always, oh, she's having a meltdown, so call mommy. And then they always have to leave work and go and get her like half day. It was not, you know, so it was always like, okay, my way of dealing with her is just, I'm paying for her to be there and I keep her so you can go to work, and that's it. They were not like, she wasn't learning, she wasn't developing. And it would always come, and I would, like, all the other kids would be in the inner room, like watching TV, watching nursery rhymes together, and Maya would be outside, like at the outside table, because that's where she wanted to be. And they would just leave her, and it was like, this is not what is supposed to be happening. It's not what I'm paying for. So the stigma is not even just an aggressive thing. It's just like a, you know, oh, they don't belong kind of thing. It's like, okay, just leave them there, and a kind of like ostracizing thing. And that's just as bad, because that kind of adds to the social social inadequacy that the autistic person is going through. That kind of piles on top of it and makes it worse, you know? So that's also something that we have to be wary of, just, you know, kind of tossing them away as though they're not worth it, I guess. Yeah.
And to add to what both of you guys have said, I think one of the things with the whole stigma, that as a parent, if you believe in it as well, then you're just projecting it to other people. Like, I mean, Jess has no stigma with autism. She, like Sharika said, she expects everything from Maya. And if she doesn't do it, then she comes to us and says, let's make her do it. Like, you know, we work as a team to figure all those steps out. So starting at home is where it's got to start. I mean, I have a lot of families that I've met that don't take their kids out because they don't want the judgment, they don't want the looks, they don't want everything. And I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's the easiest activity in the world if you have a child who's going to melt down or pull everything off the shelf. But if you're playing into it, then that is just reinforcing that, you know, there should be a stigma. And then that leads to exactly what Jess was just saying as well, with the expectation of behaviors. You know, if you hear somebody say, oh, my child has autism, or my child's autistic, or any sort of delay, to be honest, you have an expectation that child won't be able to do things, or will be able to do things only this way. And every child is so different, but also there's a negative expectation of kids on the spectrum. You know, everybody assumes that they're going to be aggressive, or assumes that they can't learn. And like Jess just said, I mean, Maya is super clever, and Maya developed a personality very early. Yes. That's the only way to describe that. And Maya doesn't want to do what Maya doesn't want to do. And obviously that doesn't work in all environments. And, you know, so creating situations where she understands that, okay, I just do it until, just like us, you know, you may not want to go to work every Monday, but you go because you know you have to. There are, you know, consequences and expectations for everybody else. And not not providing them for a kid on the spectrum just encourages the lack of understanding throughout. I mean, like Jeff said, Maya's attended a daycare where she was with the typically developing kids, but she had a different expectation. Well, there wasn't very many expectations of Maya other than being there. But just having that little bit of knowledge as a teacher or as a caregiver or as anybody else of having your own expectations of kids and pushing them to them. It may just be one, it may just be something simple like, okay, we're gonna go for a walk and come home and that's gonna be it. It's just where it starts and what you're putting out there as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. Again, Anita, if you want to jump in and ask a question, I'm giving you free pass to ask your question right now because I'm seeing that you have your hand raised and I know you had it raised for a little while. So if you can unmute your mic, I'm giving you privileges to ask the question. Okay, well, I guess Anita is not clearly hearing me answering the call. So I will move on to the other questions that we have here. I know we talk about autism in childhood and everything like that, but does it span across a lifetime? How does autism present itself through the different developmental stages from toddler, adolescence to adulthood? Is it something that a child will have for life?
I would say yes, there's no cure for autism. So it's something that will be with you to varying levels. And I can't say for every child because they always say once you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism, right? Even though there's certain characteristics that will be quite similar, every child is still individual and still will have their individual needs, their strengths and individual deficits. I'm working with a couple of people with autism now, which is a couple adults with autism now, which is new for me actually. And it is, a lot of the needs are very similar, more with social communication, social understanding, understanding what to do in certain situations, what's socially acceptable. I'm working with some adolescents because I've been doing this for 10 years now. So a lot of my 4-year-olds are now 14, right? So I'm also navigating the whole idea of, I want the girls at school to like me. So what do I do to get them to like me? And that social interaction piece, which is totally out of my area. I send a lot of people to Natasha when it becomes a behavioral something. But just in terms of that social conversation, is that relevant? Should you be talking about this at this time? If a girl is talking to you, or if a friend is talking to you, is it okay to be talking about, airplanes, or is it okay to be talking about dump trucks at this time? Or is it okay to be talking about something totally different? You have to listen to what the person's saying, because sometimes I have to teach conversation. So you say something and then I say something, then you say something and I say something, and we have to role play about that. We have to take children to do functional skills, because as they get older, we want children to be independent individuals within society. That's our goal. Yeah, we want them to communicate, but we also want them to be independent in their activities of daily living. So sometimes we have to take kids to the supermarket and teach them what to do as they get older. So the focus switches a bit more to functional skills, as opposed to, in the initial stages, it's very much about, play and, interaction within those general routines and play routines. But as they get older, it goes to more activities of daily living. So can they set a table? You know, can they go to the grocery store and get everything that they need that's on the shopping list? Do they know how to identify money? Can they understand things like time, which is very important, because that's a big skill that children with autism, you know, grapple with, children with autism and adults with autism. So we look a lot at those, you know, higher level language skills that help them to function within the environment. You know, are they able to make inferences or read the room and, you know, understand social situations that are happening? You know, for children who are in mainstream, who are on the spectrum, I would say adolescents, if they go to a classroom and they realize that the whole class has gone out, you know, they've gone out to PE or they've gone out to the music room, are they going to sit in that class? Or do they know that socially, if the class is gone, I check my timetable and see what's happening, and then, you know, figure out where to be and I go there. So it's a lot about helping them function within the social world. That's what it really looks like throughout the lifespan.
So I want to be controversial just because I like being controversial on this one topic.
Always.
And only this one topic. Shrika's right. There is no cure for autism, but there are theories that we can call it recovery, which again, so controversial. A lot of therapists don't like it, but I figure why not add to the mix right now? Yes, I'm that person. Because autism is a list of characteristics. If they change the characteristics, your child may not hit criteria anymore, etc., which is how we got the whole PDD NOS. So if you think about it, it's just a written list of description anyways. So what you can essentially do is you can work, obviously, with all of the therapists or whatnot, but if you achieve the goals that no longer classify these characteristics, then technically you've recovered from autism. It does not mean that everything else is going to be typically developing, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of the word or the label, you can lose it. I mean, it's not very common, and it's not very common that people would get reassessed just for the sake of losing a label. But there is, if you decided you wanted to research a little more, there is a lot of research on the whole recovery of autism, but there is officially no cure in any way, shape, or form. That was it. I just wanted to add to the drama.
And I mean, a lot of the times you will not see a lot of the symptoms that you had initially. I mean, you always see little things. So, I mean, I have a little boy, and when he came, he was like, I would say the poster child for autism. I can't call him a little boy anymore. He would quarrel with me, but he's about 14. And when I saw him, he did have all of the characteristics of autism. You know, he's at QC now. He has a little brother who does come to me as well. So he will come and sit in on sessions and help out sometimes. And when I would look and I will see him just lining up my toys and things, I'm like, what are you doing? And I mean, he's fully functional, fully communicative, very intelligent. You'll call him as recovered as they would call it, but he still has those little quirks that he needs to do to make it okay. I had my frogs. I have some colored frogs, and he organized all the frogs while I was doing the session, organized all of them there by color. And he doesn't even realize that he's doing it. So that you always still have some little, what I call quirk, right? Some little something, social something, or some little behavior that always pervades from what I've seen.
But even with those things, Natasha has kind of taught me that even with those little quirks, those are things that we can use that they can use to be like functional adults. So for example, with her lining up, her shoes, she always puts them like one next to the other. She has to place them together. Natasha used to take one and throw it across the room to see if she would freak out, you know, just to see how she would react, and she'll go get it and she'll bring it back. But like, that's part of her thing, and that just makes her a neat person, you know, so we can use it to your advantage. So yes, is a symptom of the autism, but also we can it's not something that we necessarily need to change. It just needs to be not a manic, you know, I need to have everything this way thing, but it's something that she can use to be, okay, we just keep things neat and tidy. So I kind of show her, okay, well, you put them in this corner, and she has her system, and she knows exactly how she puts them on, and she has to put on one sock first, and then the shoe, and then the next sock first, and then the shoe. But that's her thing, and that's how she knows how to put on her shoes. So they have their quirks and their systems, but it's not necessarily that, oh, because this is a symptom of the autism, that we turn it into a bad thing. There's some of the things that we can use to kind of like give them the order and, you know, kind of routine in their life, and they kind of just work with it. So as along with Natasha's theory of solving the things so you can recover, some of them I don't even think you need to solve per se.
Sure.
You kind of just need to like reroute them.
That's exactly it, Bess. You just turn them into functional skills. So therefore they're no longer hindering. So therefore they're no longer categorized as a symptom necessarily, like exactly like you just described with Maya and her routines. As long as she can be flexible, they're no longer restricting, right? So she's no longer hitting criteria of a restrictive repetitive behavior if she can be flexible with it.
Okay. Thank you so much for your responses. I know Jessica mentioned the word manic, and I know that we use that to classify other disorders and stuff like that. So my question would be, or someone mentioned this in the chat, is there any other disorders that come along with autism when being diagnosed?
A lot of kids, yes, again, autism is a list of characteristics, but a lot of kids have ADHD as well. I don't know if that's part of it, but there isn't necessarily because you have an autism diagnosis, you have A and B diagnosis as well. It depends on the child. Like Shrika said, every single child is so different, and the symptoms that they're displaying, you know, you may have one child that bounces around and that child has an ADHD diagnosis, but then you have another child who bounces around, but they need more sensory input. So therefore, you know, so it's labeling kids is tricky. A lot of the time we tell parents that it's either going to help you understand or help the next person understand a little bit more about the kid. So when you're doing your research, you know, you're not just listing the list of everything that you're seeing in your kid and going, how do I help them? It's at least a word that you can search or speak to somebody about, that they kind of have an idea of what's going on. But in my experience, not the only, but the most reported comorbidity is ADHD.
For my situation, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask Natasha to tell us what is ADHD.
Oh,
for those who do not know what ADHD is.
Sorry. Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder.
Okay, thank you.
I can jump in there.
Yes, you can jump in.
With the more, like, I've seen so many comorbidities. It really, as Natasha said, is an individual thing. There is, you know, autism with schizophrenia. I have seen a child with autism, cerebral palsy, and Down syndrome all presenting together. Autism and Down syndrome come together sometimes. There are quite a few comorbidities. My most common comorbidity is autism and apraxia. And apraxia is a motor coordination deficit or motor coordination disorder. A lot of the children with autism have lots of difficulty with motor planning. So us being able to do this, we take this for granted. It's a very easy motor action that we can do. Some children have lots and lots of difficulty with even planning and coordinating the movements to get hands together, right? That can be a totally different, a totally separate disorder, which is that dyspraxia or apraxia of speech or movement, or it can be very, most of the time I would say, and at some varying degree, it happens with autism, getting that motor planning together. That's why that motor imitation can be quite difficult. That's why, you know, verbal imitation can be quite difficult. That's why speech can be quite difficult, because speech is made up of motor motor movements, very fine motor movements as well. It can happen with, being able to pick up something. And so that's why children can have those fine motor difficulties too. But that's what I see as the most common, what I would say, comorbidity, that apraxia, that motor planning element, being able, because you will tell children a lot of the time with autism, touch your nose, and you could see them kind of groping to find it. They know they have to do it, but they might touch here or they might touch here, and to coordinate that motor movement to touch nose may be very, very difficult for them. So imagine being able to say the butterfly is under the microwave, right? Which has so many motor movements for the lips, the teeth, the tongue, the voice to coordinate. So that's why with a lot of the nonverbal children too, we look into that apraxic element of things as well. And while we're on the topic of movement and fine motor movement, I know that our occupational therapist had a question, or actually had something to add to something we were saying initially in terms of those motor movements and flapping and regulating. So do you think we can let Janelle unmute her mic for a minute and add to that? Hi, Janelle.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hey there.
Morning.
All right, so from an occupational therapy standpoint, when working with children with autism, we kind of look at a lot of the skills that kids need in order to be functional in a society. So whether we're looking at fine motor movements, helping them be able to button up their pants, button up their shirts, things like that, being able to tie shoelaces, being able to coordinate the movements of their hand, to be able to use a knife and fork together to cut and eat food. But the big one that we primarily deal with is a lot of sensory processing disorders. So when we hear that, it's almost like, what is sensory processing? So that essentially is how our bodies take in information from the environment. And what happens is with kids with autism, sometimes the way they receive that information doesn't come in as smoothly. So the response that they give out is sometimes, a little not as typical. This often may come out as, we see a lot of the times kids with autism do things like hand flapping. And I think as an OT, I see this from a different perspective, because parents are always like, what can I do to make my kids stop? And I'm like, but why do we want them to stop? Because they're essentially doing it because it feels good to their body, because it's helping their body to feel calm or self-regulate. That's why they're doing it. So I kind of like to take a step back and say, well, is your child in a situation where the demands are too high for them and they feel stressed? Or is this something that, they're in a situation kind of like this lockdown that we're in right now? Are we seeing these a little bit more because their whole routine has been changed? So we kind of need to take a step back and figure out why the kid is doing it. But I always like to challenge people and say, how come it's okay for people who bite their nails, which is another activity that they do to calm, that seem as acceptable in society? However, when a kid is flopping their arms, people always want to say, how do I make them stop? So I kind of want to change people's perspectives on that, because it's not always about getting them to stop. It's kind of understanding why they're doing it and what I can do to help them do something more functional in its place.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm learning a lot. I appreciate the information that was given so far to everyone on this call. I have another question. As it pertains to, the stigma of autism, and also how is it presented in the media. We know that popular shows like The Good Doctor and Big Bang Theory, characters like Sheldon, etc.
Mm-hmm.
How the media portrays autism, is that true portrayed in mainstream media and TV shows?
I think that, I guess that is the perspective that is most pleasing to people. You get what I mean? That's easier for people to accept. So that's what they gravitate towards. It's easier for me to say, oh, he's autistic, but we accept him because he's so smart, right? That's though another part of the stigma is like, in order for you to be accepted as autistic, You have to be really, really smart, really, really functional, like a real genius. As opposed to you could just be like, the average person like me and you. Maybe you're good at one thing and you're not good at, and that's like everybody's there. There are people who are genuinely geniuses, and then there are people who are really good at like physical things, but are not, you know, the most intelligent. And then there are other people who have like a high emotional IQ and can empathize with people, but they're not like good at physical stuff. And we accept that for neurotypical human beings. But when a person is autistic, somehow they have to be superb. They have to be superior to be accepted. That's part of the stigma as well. That's not the case for every autistic person. There are lots of autistic people who are just regular human beings, just trying to get through life, like me and you, trying to get a job that they like, make some money, have a family, you know, just trying to get through this everyday rat race that we're in. And they're not trying to be brain scientists, you know, brain surgeons. They're not trying to be all of that. They're not that, and they still deserve to be accepted for not being that. You know, it's part of the stigma. It's a lot of different sides to the stigma, but that's just another side of it there are the Sheldons and the, you know, the doctors and the yada yada, but they're like the minority. That's not most autistic people, you know, I think.
Yeah, this just comes back down to, one, there's a massive spectrum, and two, every single person's individual. So like Jess just said, some skills one has, the other won't have. I mean, again, autism can be something like a character like Sheldon, or a child who doesn't have physical or motor, like physical motor, any sort of motor skills or feeding skills. I mean, it's such a huge spectrum. That's again why we keep using the word spectrum. There are no two cases that are the same, and the expectations for everybody are just that they should be individual. So I mean, the media coverage, obviously they highlight the functional ones that can do things and exist in society. I like the one Atypical, it's one on Netflix. I like that one as a representation. I find that one is a little bit more, I mean, again, say it again.
Very normal. I like Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has his meltdowns, he has his sensory integration, he has his checklist, you know, like all the things that he's kind of what we hope some of our kids get to, if that makes sense. Like, you know, he's applying all the skills he's learning through therapy. They talk about therapy, they talk about parent support groups. I would say that's my favorite representation in terms of a show that is going to demonstrate what autism will look like. But again, he's a teenager, and again, he's very functional.
Okay, so everyone, you heard that. So let's tune in to look at Atypical.
I don't get a cut, unfortunately.
So our next question will be more in terms of, just like how you mentioned, parent support group and everything like that. Can you shed light the importance of counseling for caregivers of an autistic child, or anything else that can be done to protect an autistic child from being abused, whether it be verbally or physically, since it can be stressful for a person with autism?
I think Jess can probably best describe a parent's point of view, but from a therapist's point of view, I think we would follow the same rules in terms of abuse as every other child, but it also comes down to the parents. We can't force a parent to talk nicely to their child. Like Shrika said, we try and encourage as many parents as possible to participate in sessions where we can model and show ways to help support their kids. But in terms of what parents need, Jess, you want to talk about what you see parents needing?
Yeah, it can be a very stressful situation, and I think that is very important for people who don't have autistic children or have persons with autism in their life to be aware of what it is. And I think that's why we push the autism awareness and acceptance, to be aware of how stressful the situation is, because a lot of the support that I have gotten outside of Natasha and Sharika and their team has been my friends and family that don't have, like, their only connection to autism is me and Maya, but they've seen me go through it and they know how hard it can be. And I'm a very positive person. I think it has a lot to do with my attitude toward it. I don't really consider myself a victim. I don't usually wallow, but even with my positive personality, there are times that I am like low. you know, like it's very hard. And it's not even, it's just because you still have to function as a person too. Outside of being an autistic caregiver, you're still expected to be another person. Like that's not your entire being. So you still have to work and make money, and you still have to do your thing during the day, and then take care of your autistic child at night. And then when you put them to bed at night, you still have all the other things you have to do that involve getting them ready for the next day. And not everybody understands what you have to do, and it can be very overwhelming. Like when if you mention how you feel about something, and then somebody brings up something that you consider trivial to compare it to, and you're like, what? Like I just, like, they're trying to make you feel better, but you're like, this is not on the same level. And it's hard to be doing something that people don't get, you know, because they're not in the same situation. So I think it's very important to have people who do go through the same thing, to have the support of other parents who be like, yeah, girl, she had me up all night. Like, she was just crying. I don't know what happened. Like 2 days ago, Maya woke up and just cried. Like, I assume, maybe she had a dream, I don't know, but there was nothing to trigger it that I could see. I had no idea what happened. She just woke up and had a meltdown. So I just got up at 6 o'clock and dealt with an hour of a tantrum. Nothing that you could do about it, you know, like, and somebody who doesn't have an autistic child won't understand that, won't get that you could have, like, you could literally spend 2 hours of your day dealing with that, and when you're done with that, you're just totally exhausted and you don't want to have to do anything else, that you just want to sleep, but then you still have to function, you know, you still have to do all of these other things. And I believe that being a parent in general is hard, but to be a caregiver or parent of a child with autism is, I don't know how to make anybody who doesn't go through it understand. There's no way for me to get you to understand. So that's why I think it is necessary for people who have to deal with it to do it together, to have other people that they can go to and talk to. And, you know, somebody maybe who's been doing it longer that says, okay, well, maybe you should try this. You know, that happened with me, and I did this and it worked. And it doesn't always work, but at least like, it's something that you can try. You know, at least you have somebody to give you some kind of hope, to give you something that you can maybe put into practice. But when you are dealing with people who don't get it, and they just give you like the basic, you know, the pity responses, it can be very hard on you. And if everybody doesn't have a positive personality like me, so then that's where you get to the situations where you can have people that start to be abusive because they don't know how to handle it, and it becomes overwhelming for them too. And obviously they're just people that are abusive generally, and you just need to, I don't know what to do with them. But there are also people who don't mean to be, but I think that the situation can be overwhelming. And that's also where I think it's necessary for parents to also be very hands-on in the therapy sessions with, you know, the Natasha and Sharika and, you know, the therapists, because when you learn the tools and the methods to help, it makes you feel a little better. It makes you feel more equipped, because a lot of the pressure can come from feeling overwhelmed, like when you don't know what to do. And when you equip yourself with those tools, then it makes, at least I found for me, it's made my life a lot easier. Like she started with Natasha and Sharika when she was like almost 2. Like she was barely 2.
Yeah.
And we went from her not wanting to do anything and crying like for an entire session, literally crying for a whole hour, to full interaction right now. And every time I go and I see the improvement, it just makes me feel like, okay, we got this, we could do this. And, you know, and I've been to maybe 90% of her sessions. Is literally, if I can't make it, then my mother or her dad will take over. But I am the one that is there all the time because I want to see, I want to know what worked and what didn't work. And I want to tell Natasha, this is not cutting it. I can't do this. And for Natasha to tell me, okay, well, let's try this. And there are lots of times that we try things and it don't work, and we have to go back from scratch and, you know, start again. And it's a very, you have to be very hands-on. And I think being involved in this situation with your child and knowing that it's both of you that have to do it together makes you feel a little more equipped to handle the situation. It gives you that peace of mind that it's something that you can do and you can get through. And I think when you feel more secure in yourself, then you will kind of step away from the abuse and, you know, the aggression and the abusive tendencies, because a lot of that does come from fear and feeling overwhelmed and inadequate and that kind of thing.
Thank you very much for your responses. So I think the takeaway points is being more involved, being more engaged, and understanding the process of what your child is going through, and also understanding that you're only human.
Yes, and also making sure you surround yourself with people who are in the same situation.
Yeah, so support system is crucial in a village. It takes a village to raise a child, so I guess that's really, really important. We're going to have 2 more questions and wrap up because it's soon 12 o'clock. If we had a whole list of questions, I think we should do another another Zoom meeting because there were a lot of questions that was flooding the chat and stuff like that. So the other question we would like to get answered is about diet. Gut health. Can diet, which is gut health, help with behavior? Someone says, I have a 3-year-old son, keeps chewing his shirt, where I change his shirt 4 times a day. What can I do to stop this?
So diet isn't really our scope. That would be more of like a biomedical side, or even talking to a nutritionist. Again, it's more medical in terms of if your child is chewing on his shirt because of a lack of something in their diet. That's something that we wouldn't be able to help with. We would be able to more help support things like Sharika would focus on the communication to if he was hungry, speaking and talking about being hungry or asking for what he wants. And Noti would be able to help you. Is it a sensory need? Is he seeking something in his mouth? So diet isn't really something we would put you on to a nutritionalist. We don't have a biomedical treatment in Barbados that I'm aware of. But we do have really great dietitians that are super helpful, or your pediatrician would be able to, I think, help guide you with that as well.
Yeah, I think that's an OT question though, because that sounds like a sensory need, because usually that's a sensory thing when we see children doing that chewing for that need for sensory input. So I might ask Janelle to speak on that too.
Thanks, Sharika. So yes, definitely when you're seeing a child do any type of chewing on clothing or any other item, it's a way for them to self-calm. So that's why they're doing it. So each time they're chewing, they're getting that nice compression inside their jaw, and it's helping their body to feel calm. That's why they're essentially doing it. So the first thing is, when you see them chewing, don't keep saying, stop that, because they're doing it for a reason. So what you want to do is you want to try and essentially acknowledge it. And you could say, depending on the age of the child, is depending on what kind of language you could use. But if this were, without knowing any other background history, I would just kind of approach it like, hey, I noticed that you're chewing on your shirt. That's telling me that your body's trying to be calm. But instead of chewing on your shirt, these are times when you want to offer the child like crunchy, chewy snacks. So when I say a crunchy snack, something like crackers, but not goldfish crackers. You really want to go for like those really hard Eclipse crackers, so they're getting lots of feedback inside of their mouth. Something like chewing gum, where they're able to get that nice chewing, because that's still helping their mouth to feel good, but it's taking that need for them to chew on that clothing or other article that we don't want them to do. So you have to acknowledge it. Don't tell them to necessarily stop, but you want to replace it with something else, because they're doing it because they really want to be calm. So that's why you're seeing that behavior. But there's a whole other bunch of layers that would need to be assessed without knowing the parent and the child and any other background information. I would start with those strategies. Another one that's pretty easy to do is making like smoothies, milkshakes, those sort of things, but having them drink through a straw. So again, giving them a lot of feedback inside their mouths. They're getting that nice calming feeling when you're seeing those chewing type of behaviors take place.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I just wanted to stress quickly, very quickly, the importance of a team. Like, we have a really, really good team that we work together, behavioral, occupational therapy, speech therapy. And when we work together, we just see so many changes. So just really pushing for that multidisciplinary team approach. Continue.
Okay. So this question,
sorry, about the gut health thing. As I said, that's a whole biomedical thing, but I know that there was, playing devil's advocate like Natasha knows, there was this theory around, because I read a book about it. I'm very big, and I really encourage parents to who have children on the spectrum to read the material that's there. There are lots of books. If you don't like to read, there are lots of audio books to the actual books that are really good in like hearing the experience of other people and that kind of thing. But I can't remember the name of the book, but there was a book about dietary health for children with autism where people were saying that like gluten-free diets and removing dairy from a child's diet and things not cured them. I wouldn't say it was a cure, but made certain things better, especially since a lot of children with autism have problems with their gut, like have gut problems and that kind of thing. So that kind of like eased some of these symptoms and made things a lot easier. But I don't know if that's like a proven thing. I guess that's just people trying things.
There's tons of research supporting diet and gut. It's just not our area. But for sure, I would definitely suggest any parent to read up on it. Yeah, there's an amazing book called Kids with Starving Brains. I cannot remember the author. It has this really, really old school cover, but it literally goes through like a ton of different foods and what your body needs and what may be missing. The problem is we don't know. I have a lot of parents that do a lot of trials, a lot of vitamins or a lot of different things. Obviously, when you're working with the gut as well, again, I'm speaking from working with parents who've done this, I'm not professional in this at all. But a lot of parents with kids with leaky gut, meaning that their intestines and stuff are not absorbing any of the nutrients. So they have to look for other methods to get certain vitamins into their kids. I've had kids who are on injections from methyl B12. I think there's a ton of research behind it. And I definitely would support looking into it. But like Jeff said, you got to do your own research because we don't have facilities down here to support stuff like biomedical treatment. But there's a ton of research. It's really great research as well that you can learn a lot about and yourself. Like, I mean, there a lot of the time we would benefit. Like, you know, it's one of those things that if we had more of A and more of B in our diet, that we'd feel better, that our body would function a little bit better. The idea is that the kids, the book with the children with starving brains is really good because it literally gives you a visual that kids who are being denied a lot of the nutritions that we need, their brains are starving, as in, you know, they're hindering in certain areas and they're finding different pathways to get to the same finish. I'm very visual, and I remember a parent explaining this to me one time after having her biomedical intervention. She was saying that, you know, they described the autistic brain as just like a roadmap with a lot of different detours, and you're trying to get around all these detours, but you're looking at going in the same direction as everybody else. And that was it. The biomedical side was trying to figure out how to whether build bridges or dig tunnels or different ways to get to the same place. And I think that's what therapy is based on as well. You know, we're all trying to get to that same forward direction. But definitely, like Jess said, do your research, look it up, and not necessarily blogs. No, as in not blogs, as in don't do your research blogs, but follow the links, look up the information and see where it's coming from. I mean, I've had some seriously scary information sent to from parents saying they want to try stuff, put their kids on trial runs for drugs for Alzheimer's because, you know, this one person trending said this about autism. You know, know your child and speak to people, but see where the research is coming from. Because there's so much out there. There's so many different ideas and therapies and different theories and stuff are being developed every day. So if you can keep up with some of it and not all of it, I mean, I struggle with a lot of it and it's my job. But they're, like Jeff said, if you're more informed, then you at least have a fight when somebody says something or a suggestion when somebody, you know, says your child is doing this because of this. It just helps. I mean, information is, you know, so important, right? Especially with something like this.
Thank you so much for your responses. Research is important, but the source where we're getting the information from is really, really important, as you highlighted. Our next question is related to same thing that we were talking about, identifying the signs and symptoms and autism as a characteristics. But these two questions are really from parents who may suspect that their children is on the autistic spectrum. So I'm going to repeat these two questions. My son, while not officially diagnosed, is suspected to be on the spectrum. He lines things up in a line. Should I be doing anything to change this behavior? I would assume not, as it is harmless. And the other one is, how do I assess my 3-year-old who is exhibiting signs of autistic behavior, such as limited speech, lining up objects, and toys, spontaneous screaming and displaying aggressive behavior, appearing distracted, spaced out, exhibiting poor social skills, etc.
I think we covered the first one already with the lining up toys. Did we?
Yeah,
No, we discussed it, but I would like to add to any behavior, just as a general rule of thumb. From my point of view, my training, we don't change behaviors that don't have any social significance. So we're not trying to change a child just because you don't like the way they do something. You know, for example, lining things up, like Jess had discussed it, which I think is what you're referring to, Sharika. We made it functional. Like, you know, you're allowed to line up things like your shoes and all that. But even if a child's playing and they're lining things up, what my goal for a child who has a routine like that is that if maybe another child can move one of their toys, the child can either vocalize, don't do that, stop, or be okay with the fact that their lines were broken. So it's socially significant behavior basically just means that the child can function with it. So if you have a child who, I didn't get the full question from the second question, but I did hear the zoning out part. If you have a child who's, for example, zoning out, I zone out all the time. But when my name is called, Shrika does too. But if you're called and you can bring yourself back in, that's the skill, right? So it's not the fact that somebody is zoning out is the problem. It's how they're going to function in life. It's one of those things that it kind of sucks, but we're trying to teach kids just basically to be socially acceptable. It does not mean that their personalities don't come through. Jess can tell you 1000% Maya is probably the strongest individual you will ever come across in your entire life. If Maya doesn't want to do it, she doesn't want to do it. But we have to teach her to be flexible. And she's able to do that. And she's now able to explain, well, she'll indicate when she doesn't want to do something. I mean, we have a particular activity specifically with Maya that I do with her and she hates. And as soon as she sees the cards, she will verbally protest straight away. She refuses to get things correct. And I mean, so for me, it's not that she's presenting a problem because it's now my decision to make a better situation to create behaviors that she can use. So asking for a break or a different activity, or just even saying, I don't want to do it. You know, that's more socially appropriate. So we are trying to create behaviors that are socially appropriate because that's how we're going to function in life. If your child ends up in a school or even at the beach, you want them to be able to play with other kids or communicate with other individuals that don't necessarily know them or what they want. So when it comes to behaviors, I mean, what I would tell you is if it's not socially significant, we wouldn't do it. I have had parents who get really hardcore into every single thing the kid does. And I've had a parent come to me one time saying that we have a new behavior we need to work on. And that her son was rolling his tongue. And he literally was just flipping his tongue upside down in his mouth. So I assumed that it was hindering something. So I was like, oh, does he do it like when you talk to him or when he's supposed to give a response? No, he just does it and I don't like it. That's not something we're gonna deal with. I know things that your kids do can be annoying and, you know, but in situations like that, it's just, he was maybe figuring out where his tongue was. He's, you know, was nonverbal at the time. He liked the way it felt. So things like that, it's not hindering him. It's not hindering his learning or his functioning in society. We're not gonna touch it. He likes to roll his tongue and that's cool.
For the second question, I think it would be good for that person to just reach out because it does sound like they need the intervention from a team, right? Okay. So from speech, I heard some speech, behavior, and OT things as well.
I think they can just start by taking them to the pediatrician. My first indicator of anything, my first confirmation of anything being wrong with Maya was her pediatrician, and her pediatrician is who actually sent me to Natasha and Sharika, and, you know, recommended, and it was she highlighted it to me from the time Maya was like 1, because she noticed first Maya not responding to her name. She brought it to my attention, and that's when we kind of like, so she said this is something that we're going to pay attention to. So we didn't act on it right away, but every time we came to her, she would talk to her, she would monitor. So I think the pediatrician can be like the first step. If your pediatrician thinks it's something that is, you know, worth going further, then they can recommend you to the Natasha or Sharika. I mean, by all means, her pediatrician sent me to them, but we did go to the CDC as well, which is Children's Development Center, and we got Maya diagnosed there from Dr. Campbell. But even when we went there, the CDC is so I won't say delayed, it's so full.
Overwhelmed.
It's right, it's overwhelmed. So like, if I had tried to do just the CDC because they're free, you know, they're available to the public, then I think Maya would still be, because she was on a waiting list for, well, she's still on the waiting list as far as I know. She's 4 and she hasn't been called yet. And they told me, oh, we'll put her on the waiting list. And they called Sharika as soon as I walked out the room. It was like, they want to put her on the waiting list for 2 years. Nope, not going to happen. It's like, we're starting from next week. Because you still, even if your pediatrician doesn't seem, and this, going back to what I said again, following your intuition, even if your pediatrician doesn't think that is a thing and you think that it is, bypass them and go to, you know, like, I was like, this is what the CDC says. They say they're going to put me on this list. I don't care. I'm going to you because that's my child. And when it's all said and done, I would rather spend all the money in the world and then nothing be wrong. I mean, I've paid $700 for hearing to make sure that she wasn't deaf. I've spent a lot of money on my child, you understand? Just to be aware of what it was. And I would spend it again, because if I have to, I would rather spend it and hear, oh, nothing's wrong. I spent $700 and he told me, oh, her hearing is perfect. I was like, yeah, thanks. Right? I would rather spend $700 and hear that her hearing is perfect than for me to not know that she has a hearing problem. So if you genuinely feel that something is wrong and you're not getting, you know, what you want from one person, feel free to bypass them and go to the next. That's your prerogative as a parent to do that. Well,
and that point, Jess, as well, I want to just push as well that you don't need a pediatrician to send you to us. Like Jess said, her pediatrician did, for example, and you also don't need a diagnosis to reach out. It doesn't have to necessarily, if you have a question or a concern, or you're like, are you the right person? I've had loads of parents call me once, I think they think I'm Sharika, but saying that, you know, they want to work on their child's speech. And I was like, that's awesome, let's do it, but call this person instead. So we're also here to help get to the next step. I've had many kids referred from Sharika, and I'll just get a nice little message going, I'm sending one to you, then send them back when they're able. And, you know, little skills that, like sitting at the table and being able to follow instruction. If your child's missing the foundation skills and they're not going to be able to build, like Sharika said, we work as a team, and every team should work as a team. If your team is not working as a team, tell them to work as a team, because we're an asset to you, but only as much as we're to each other. I mean, Sharika and I have meetings where we'll go over clients and we make sure that we're working on the same page. Luckily, we think very similarly, so they're super easy and it's very quick. But a lot of the time, you know, I do come across a different therapist that I kind of have to convince to be a part of the team, or that we're going to do these meetings, or, you know, by the way, I asked mom to do this, and then we have to be able to support each other to support you guys. And you guys are the ones who need the support in terms of what we're going to follow through with at home. So, you know, just coming back to the whole, if you have a question, just ask. We have no problem answering our phones or replying to a message. So and we also want to get you to where you need to go. So if it's not one of us that you need, or we don't suit you, and also it's personality. If you don't like the way we do things, then we'll send you somewhere else, like if we can.
Okay. So guys, so everyone on this call, we would share the information of Natasha and Sharika for any of those who want to reach out concerning their children. So the time is 12:01. We have one more question, and then we're going to end the session briefly. So this question is geared to how can service clubs like Rotary Club of Barbados and other service organizations help to promote awareness of autism, and how can we assist our community in terms of children who are autistic and everything like that?
Doing this, I like this. Let's do this.
More of this.
You know, is good.
Yeah. And just get it out to more people as well. So yeah, you're doing a great job.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So we should do more sessions like this for the wider public.
That's the thing, right? It's getting the information out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think we're going to close off now. I would really like really like us to do a part 2, because we haven't covered all the questions, but I think a part 2 is really necessary. I'm hoping that you guys will be on board for part 2.
That's fine, baby.
Yeah, so thank you so much for all the information that you guys shared. It was very insightful.
Thank you for having us.
No problem. Thank you for accepting our invitations. And I know we had a little hiccup in terms of the Zoom link, but I guess we rolled with the punches and we were able to tune in and hear everything that was related to autism. And it was really a wonderful session. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge and your experience, Jessica. We really, really, truly appreciate taking time out of your Saturday morning to be here with us.
Thank you.
So we appreciate you guys. And
so fun.
yeah, thank you so much. So